lesson 1, we looked at your experience of harmonic vibrancy, of the difference between the experience, the energy depleting, and the experience of energy enhancing groups and spaces. We found that there were 5 ways that you relate to that, and we developed the 3 circle diagram to talk about the level and the consistency and coherence of your experience among those 5 relationships at those 3 levels to differentiate what's happening between the experience of scarcity, energy depletion, lack, and that of energy enhancing or abundance. Now we're going to add another piece. One of the nuances that we found as we listened to people engaging and trying to understand what differentiates these 2 experiences and the agreements that are different in them, we found the subtlety of what we're going to call the 3 levels of perceived reality. And that's the focus of this lesson, chapter 2. What we're going to see, and we started to label this as we looked at the nature axis, or the relationship to nature in the 5 relationships at the 3 different levels. We started to notice that there were these 3 levels of reality that we were working with. And those are the level of possibility or potential, the level of development or change over time, and the level of outcomes. It'll be helpful for us to start seeing how to look at that across all 5 of these relationships as we start looking at our agreements. So what I'm going to do is draw a table. Makes it a little easier for me to write down what we're going to be talking about. If I draw it as a set of boxes versus circles, and I'll show you in a few minutes how this relates to the other diagram. What we can see, or we'll use to help us see, is how we look at the 5 relationships. Self, other, group, nature, and spirit, which are equivalent to these: self, other, group, nature, and spirit, at 3 levels of perceived reality. A level of possibility, a level of development, and the level of things. Now we're going to try to always find the language that people are using as, again, they're describing in our experience the difference between this energy depleting and this energy enhancing experience. So we're trying to find what is the ways that we know in our own experience when we're in one of these situations to help us see the agreements in that and choose different ones. So we're going to call possibility, but we also talk about potential. And we also talk about light. In development, we also talk about change over time, or motion. And in things, we also talk about outcomes, or matter. And a distinction that's been helpful for me that I'll use as we're talking through is to call these nouns verbs and light. So in our experiences, we're talking about our experiences in these different groups or spaces between the low vibrancy and the high vibrancy, the scarcity, the abundance, the energy depleting, the energy enhancing. We're distinguishing three different levels of reality that are present for us. And what we want to distinguish is how aware are we of them in these different experiences. And what we're going to find, as we started to note when we were looking at the three circles, five relationships diagram, was that in this inner circle experience, which was this lower vibrancy or the energy depleting experience, there was really only this outcomes level, this things level. But in the middle level, we had access to a couple, the development over time, and the outcomes level. And at this outer experience, which is how people were describing this higher vibrancy, this energizing experience, we had access to possibilities that we were developing over time and experiencing the outcomes. So we experienced all three of them in this outer circle of the bigger me, supported by you, with all the voices coming together in the group, all three levels of reality, and the source of creativity being experienced everywhere. So we're now going to see what happens when we allow these three levels of perceived reality to support our experience of the five relationships. Now, another piece of your experience. One way to start thinking about this is that we're building up from the obvious of the outcomes to adding some change in the outcomes, the development of outcomes, and then what are the possibilities for developing outcomes. But what we want to start seeing is that how we actually experience life? So I'm going to walk through what is our experience in each of these and share some stories. We're going to start with the self. The self in the things is this experience of here I am, these are the capacities that I bring, I know what I have. The experience of the self in development is my own learning and changing over time. The capacities I'm developing, my experience in learning, and relationships I'm developing. Possibility is when I look into my own potential. And what do I see when I look into myself and my own potential? Now, when I start to look at the other, I can say, well, what capacities do you have, do you bring today? What are you able to do that's valuable to us right now? And I can also see that you're learning and developing capacities. And I can also see potential in you. Now, this can start to sound kind of soft, qualitative, woo-woo, subjective. And so I really push you, and I get to do this with different groups that I work with, to say, do you really experience that this ability to see the possibility or the potential or the light in others actually exists? And so one of the fun things I get to do is to really start asking groups, what is your experience up here? And so I'll share one of these experiences. For example, I'm working with executives in an MBA program that I teach in. I say, so what we know is that you know when you're going to hire somebody. How many of you have ever hired somebody? And most of the people say, I have hired somebody. Or I said, if you haven't hired somebody, have you ever welcomed somebody new into a relationship with you, and as a new friend, a new partner, somebody said, I know we're going to have a great relationship together. And so far, everybody says, I've had one of those kinds of experiences. I said, good. So how do you know that this person that you're getting ready to hire is going to work in this job? And so we start thinking about that, and I ask you to think about that. When you get ready to hire somebody, how do you know that they're going to be able to do the job? And so the obvious and only way to actually know that they can do the job is that they're already doing the job. So if the only way to know that they can do the job is because they already have the job. The only way I can know that you're going to be a great friend of mine is because you're already a great friend of mine. Right? So that's the only way that we can know that. Now, as you might be doing, most people look at me like with this confused look of, well, that's stupid. Of course I don't hire people to do a job that are already doing the job because I don't need to hire them. It isn't the experience of meeting somebody new and knowing they'll be best friends, or they're going to fit great in our community or our family. If they're already in our family, I don't have to have that experience because it's different. I said, okay, well, what we know is you can do the job, you can get the outcomes if you're already getting outcomes. How would you possibly know that this person will fit and can do it if they're not already doing it? And this is where I start to ask you to do the reflection and ask them. I said, how do you know that? They say, well, you can just see it. Okay, what does this mean, I can just see it? What is actually happening when you just see it? And what people will start to share, and maybe you've had similar experience, is to say, well, I can see it in their eyes. There's just a potential. It's just a creativity. There's something there that I see that I know that you're going to fit. And we see that this sort of breaks down into two categories. One is people will say, well, they're kind of doing the same kind of thing elsewhere. You're friends with a friend of mine, so we'll probably be good friends. Or if I'm going to hire you, you're doing a job like this elsewhere. And I say, perfect. So you know that they can do the job here in your company because they're doing the same job somewhere else. And the response I always get is, well, not exactly. I mean, they're going to have to learn our culture. They're going to have to learn our processes. But over time, they can do that. I said, what is this over time thing? Does it really exist? And they say, yes. Over time, people can develop these capacities, and what they could do over there, they can now do here. And I said, okay, so this is real for you. It's not just outcomes, but there's also this ability to develop over time this capacity to adjust from what you knew how to do somewhere else to doing it here. But it requires time, it requires development of capacities and relationships to be able to do what you could do here because it's different here than here. Yes, we do that all the time. All right, if you say so. The other category that we hear is, well, you know, this person's actually never done this before. I just met you. I don't know any of the same people that you do. Yet I know you're going to be great in our community, our company, in my family. You're going to be one of my best friends. How do you know that? And when we talk about hiring somebody, how do you know that this person that you're getting ready to hire, who is just out of college, who has a complete career change, who you just met, you said, you're going to fit in great here. How do you know? And what you hear over and over again, and I ask you to think about this for yourself, and go out and ask other people, is they say, you can just see it in their eyes. I said, what do you see? Well, they have great potential. So what is this potential? What is this possibility? He says, well, you can just see it. I said, good. And do you actually believe that? Yes. And how often are you right? And they said, no, when I know I see the potential in somebody, I know that it's going to work. And often it does. So the point that we're working is that you can see that in somebody else. You can see the capacities that they bring. You can see that they can develop the capacities to adjust to this set of agreements, this culture over time, developing new capacities and relationships. And you can just see this potential in somebody's eyes. Somehow you know that it's true. So what we're working on here is to say that it's not true that they're only things, and it'd be nice if there was development and possibly potential. Rather, we're saying that as we're looking at these agreements that differentiate these two experiences from energy depleting to energy enhancing, on these 5 relationships in these 3 levels, that people are working with realities that are very real. Sounds odd to say, right? Real realities. So I'm going to call these the perceived levels of reality. What will become important as we further explore this is how much of this perceived reality is it allowed in or integrated into the agreements that we're having. And to cut to the chase, we're going to see in these energy depleting, the only reality that is generally accepted and what we see is the outcomes things level. Yet when we get over to the energy enhancing, as we already described in these 3 circles, all 3 of these levels are consciously available and we're working with them. So that's where it becomes important. So likewise, where I can see the outcomes and the capacities that are available in me, and I can see those in you and the other, I can also see what's available in the group and what outcomes and processes or more material-like things do we see in nature, and what is the creativity that has been given to us in the form of that book, the knowledge that we've received. Generally accepted accounting principles. This is our book of knowledge received. These are the practices and procedures that we have. This is how we know how to do things. Likewise, we can see the development level. That same, I know that you'll be able to adjust, and you are adjusting. and you are not the same person that I saw 6 months ago or a year ago. I ask you to reflect on, can you tell the difference between your kid when he's 17 and when he was 15? Can you see the difference between somebody today and where they were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And what we constantly say, and I've heard, but I ask you to reflect on, is do you also know the difference between somebody today and where they were in their own knowledge just a few years ago? If you do, then you're experiencing this development. And we can see how, and then I have learned, I can see how you have learned, and you can appreciate that I've learned and developed capacities in new relationships. We can see that our group has developed and is in a different place. And in nature, we can see that we're living into the processes and movement over time of nature, and that we're looking for creativity as it evolves and emerges through others, through the voices in addition to what we brought from before. And so likewise at the possibility level, I can see potential in myself. Am I really living into my potential of who I could be and want to be? My aspirations. Are you living into your aspirations? And I can see that somehow. I note this with you. I can see as a group living into its vision, its aspirations. I can look into nature. What are the possibilities that emerge that are a reality of how we're working with nature? And where is the creativity at the possibility level that we can begin to explore that's everywhere if we just know how to engage it? So we have the three levels of perceived reality. And the question is how much of each is available to us in our agreements as we move from scarcity-based to abundance-based agreements. One last thing that we want to bring through the perceived levels of reality is your orientation and to how to work with these three levels. And we found three very basic orientations. The first is how do we work with the things or outcome as the reality, and that we're trying to bring more light to it. So an enlightened kind of matter or things approach. A very different approach is working with possibility and how do we ground it, the grounded potential approach. And then there's a third approach where we find people just staying on the level. They get on one of these levels and that's the only reality that they perceive. So basically, we're going to find those three different orientations. Do you believe that the main reality is the one of things? And then you can ask the development question. You say, how do I develop further capacities to get the outcomes that I want? The focus is on the outcomes, and what am I learning over time to get better outcomes? A further approach is to say, do I see the potential in you, and us, and me, and nature and spirit, to further develop the capacities to get the outcomes? And as you can hear in that, the focus is always on the outcomes. A very different approach that seems to be the same because it has all three levels is to start with possibility. I see in you the potential, the possibility in our relationship in coming together and interacting together that we can step into this new possibility. And out of that possibility, we choose to develop certain futures that we can see towards future outcomes. So we're starting with the possibility, and how well are we developing the capacity to step into that future possibility, manifesting these outcomes. The focus is always on the possibility that we're choosing to manifest. A third level, or third perspective that we see is staying on the level. And this would be people who say, for example, oh yeah, we completely live in the possibility. Now if you remember what I had said, is if you're in this outer circle, this higher vibrancy group, this energy enhancing group experience, then you're living all three of these. You're living possibility and development and outcomes. Just development and outcomes, just outcomes. So it's additive. This is just outcomes, this is outcomes and development, this is outcomes and development and possibilities. So what happens when a group says, oh, we work in the possibilities? There's a lot of possibility language, I can see the potential, this is our vision for who we want to be, and they never choose to develop any of that possibility and have any outcomes. So they're just living in the possibility. Other groups that we find are very process focused. They say, oh, we live in development all the time. We're always developing new capacities and relationships and focused always on where are we in our own development. And you'll notice that they don't look into possibilities, they're just always in development. They don't have outcomes, they're always in development. And there are other groups who are just into outcomes. So we don't really pay attention to any of these other things. We're really focused on what are the results of what we're getting and doing, or just what are the results. So what we find is any one of these is really talking about that their outcome is whatever level they're on, but they're not working across all three levels. So what we want to do as we move into the next lesson and start looking at our agreements is to discover which pathway are we working through with which levels are available to us in all five of these relationships, and how are we working through them? Are we focusing on the outcomes and how we can better improve our outcomes with better development possibility, focusing on the outcomes, or are we focusing on possibility and how we can start to manifest some of that possibility, or are we just staying on the level? We can see now the connection between those two experiences that we described through these five relationships to see the three circles, and that these three circles, as we sort of flatten this diagram out to provide a space for us to talk about them, we have the five relationships and the three levels, and now we have a way to talk about what are the levels of perceived reality available to us in the five relationships. And that completes lesson 2.